everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into all those articles and research papers you sent about bird flu.
Yeah.
You're clearly looking for a full picture on all this stuff, especially with all the recent news about the virus, spreading.
Right.
Even that unfortunate death here in the U.S. So we'll break down what bird flu actually is, how worried you should be, and what, if anything, you can actually do about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This isn't like some brand new virus we've never seen before.
That's true. The research shows that this bird flu is also known as H5N1, has actually been around since the 90s. But this time, it seems like it's different.
Right, and this particular strain is making the jump from birds to other animals.
Okay.
And that's what's raising eyebrows in the scientific community.
Okay, so it's jumping from birds to what exactly? What should we be concerned about?
Well, it's not just chickens and turkeys anymore.
Right.
It's been detected in dairy cows, which wouldn't be a big deal, except for the fact that these cows are shedding the virus in their milk.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we know raw milk can be a source of some illnesses, but bird flu, that's a whole other level of concern.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, we're talking about raw milk here, not the pasteurized kind you'd find in the grocery store, right?
Exactly. Pasteurization kills the virus, but raw milk, that's a different story.
Yeah.
And it's not just drinking it either. Remember, the virus is present in a cow's saliva, mucus, and droppings, so even contact with those can be a risk.
Got it. So direct contact with infected birds or infected animals or their droppings, that's the main way that it spreads, right?
Right.
That makes you think twice about petting that cute stray duck at the park.
Yeah.
But what about human-to-human transmission? I know you sent in some questions about whether this could turn into a pandemic.
Thankfully, all the research indicates human-to-human transmission hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
So at least for now, it's not spreading the same way as, say, the seasonal flu that comes around every year.
Okay, that's good news. But even if it's not a pandemic, what about the general risk to humans? Should we be worried about catching this from, say, touching a doorknob or something?
The current thinking is that the general public is at a fairly low risk. You don't need to worry about casually catching this from surfaces. But certain groups who work closely with poultry or cattle are definitely at higher risk, especially anyone involved in culling birds, for instance.
Yeah, one article you sent painted a pretty clear picture of this. 67 people have been infected in the U.S. since 2022, and around 40 of those were dairy workers.
Right.
That's a pretty strong link.
It is, and it underscores why protective gear and proper handle procedures are absolutely crucial in those settings.
Absolutely. So those are the people most at risk. But what about the rest of us? What kind of symptoms should we be looking out for, just in case?
Well, one of the things that surprised me in the research was that pink eye, or conjunctivitis, can actually be one of the first symptoms in humans.
Oh, wow.
Alongside the more typical mild flu-like symptoms, of course.
Interesting. So if you wake up with pink eye and feeling achy, maybe stay home just in case.
Probably a good idea.
Speaking of protecting ourselves, you also sent in some questions about the bird feeder dilemma.
Right.
Should we be taking them down given the spread of this virus?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Bird feeders and baths can attract all kinds of wild birds, including those that might carry the virus.
What?
But it really boils down to how much direct contact you have with the birds at your feeder.
So what's the official guidance? Should we pack up our bird feeders and call it a day?
The CDC says to try and avoid direct contact with wild birds, especially ducks and geese, and to stick to observing them from a distance if possible. They also recommend not touching surfaces that might be contaminated with bird droppings.
So maybe break out the binoculars and admire them from afar for a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And if you absolutely have to keep your feeders up, make sure to clean them really well, like bleach level cleaning.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And be sure to wash your hands thoroughly anytime you're near the feeders or handling anything that could be contaminated.
For sure.
This whole thing about avoiding contact makes you realize just how much we interact with birds without even thinking about it.
It's true. This situation with bird flu is really making us rethink our relationship with wildlife in general and how important it is to learn to coexist safely and responsibly.
Well said. So we've talked about what bird flu is, how it spreads, who's most at risk, and some basic precautions we can all take. But there's another layer to this that we need to address. You're thinking about the bigger picture, right? The one that goes beyond individual risk.
Yeah.
And gets into the systems that might be driving the spread of this virus in the first place.
Right.
All this talk about bird flu jumping from birds to mammals and potentially even mixing with the human flu.
Right.
It makes you wonder about the role humans are playing in all of this. Is there something about how we're raising animals that's making this more likely to happen?
That's the million-dollar question. When you look at all these sources together, the sheer number of animals involved is staggering. We've got these massive poultry farms, huge dairy herds, all packed into relatively small spaces. It's a lot of interaction between humans and animals in very close quarters.
And all that close contact has to be creating more opportunities for viruses to jump species, right?
It's a textbook example of how these things can happen. You have a virus circulating among a large population of birds.
Yeah.
Then you bring in a bunch of mammals, in this case cows, and suddenly you've got a perfect environment for the virus to try and make the leap.
And this isn't just a one-off thing, right? This kind of intensive farming is happening all over the world.
Exactly. And when you add in global trade and travel, it's easy to see how a virus can hitch a ride and spread rapidly across vast distances.
Right.
Think about all those chickens being shipped around the world or people moving between countries. It creates a network for a virus to exploit.
So in a way, this bird flu situation is forcing us to take a hard look at modern food production.
It is. It's a wake-up call. It's highlighting the potential risks of concentrating so many animals in one place.
What's interesting is that one of the articles you sent talked about how factory farms aren't just a potential breeding ground for bird flu. They could also be contributing to the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Right.
It's like a double whammy.
It's a crucial point. The more we rely on antibiotics in animal agriculture, the more we risk creating superbugs that could pose a serious threat to human health.
It all feels very interconnected, doesn't it? The way we treat animals, the way we produce our food, the health of the planet, it's all tied together.
It is. That's what's so fascinating about these kinds of deep dives. They really force you to see the connections between seemingly disparate things. And it's not just about panicking, it's about being informed, thoughtful, and proactive.
So given all this, what are some things people can do to, be more mindful of these issues?
Well, knowledge is power, right? So doing your research, learning about where your food comes from, supporting sustainable farming practices, those are all good places to start.
You also mentioned supporting sustainable farming practices. Are there certain labels we should be looking for when we go to the grocery store? Like, is organic always better?
It's not always that simple labels can be confusing, and it's important to dig a little deeper. But you're right, looking for certifications like Certified Humane or Animal Welfare Approved can be a good indicator that the animals were raised in a more ethical and sustainable way.
And I guess being aware of things like antibiotic use in livestock is important too.
It is.
Maybe reducing our consumption of meat in general could help.
Those are definitely steps in the right direction.
Yes.
Even small changes in our individual choices can have a ripple effect.
Okay, so we're talking about big systemic issues here, but let's bring it back to the individual level for a second. We've covered the basics of bird flu, but there's one more angle I think we need to address before wrapping up. We talked about how there's currently no vaccine for this particular strain of bird flu.
Right.
But you sent in some info about efforts to develop one.
Yeah, you bet. The U.S. government is pouring resources into vaccine development.
Okay.
Which I think highlights how seriously they're taking this threat.
Yeah.
One article mentioned that Moderna received nearly $600 million
Wow.
to develop an mRNA vaccine,
Okay.
specifically targeting this strain.
Wow, that's a huge investment. But why mRNA? What's so special about that approach?
That's what I found so interesting. It's all about speed and adaptability.
Yeah.
With traditional vaccines, it can take years to develop and manufacture them.
Right.
But with mRNA technology, scientists can basically plug in the genetic code of the virus and create a vaccine much faster.
So it's like having a blueprint that you can quickly modify to target new strains as they pop up.
Exactly.
That could be a game changer, not just for bird flu, but for other emerging viruses too.
Absolutely. This technology has the potential to revolutionize how we respond to infectious diseases. It's like we're moving from a reactive approach to a more proactive one.
That's a great point. So on the one hand, we have these potentially concerning trends in how we're raising animals. And on the other hand, we're developing these incredible new tools to combat viruses. It's a bit of a seesaw, isn't it?
It really is. It speaks to the complexity of the challenges we're facing. It's not just about science or technology. It's also about ethics, economics, and our relationship with the natural world.
So to wrap things up, what's the one big takeaway you want to leave our listener with?
I think the key takeaway is that we're all interconnected. What happens in one corner of the world on a poultry farm or in a research lab can have ripple effects everywhere else. This bird flu situation is a reminder that we need to think holistically, about our health, the health of animals, and the health of the planet.
I like that. It's not about panicking, it's about being informed and making conscious choices.
Right.
And maybe even staying curious enough to do our own deep dives into these issues.
Exactly. The more we understand these complex systems, the better equipped we'll be to make informed decisions and navigate the challenges ahead.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of bird flu. We've covered a lot of ground today. But remember, knowledge is power. Stay curious, stay informed, and maybe stick to bird watching from afar for a bit. Until next time.